thank you very much. Welcome everyone to this panel, Education Tomorrow's Human Capital. I'm Winston Chan. So I had the chance to sit on the Education and the Future of Work Task Force at the Business 20, G20, which represents the private sector in the G20 countries. And one of the hot topic right now is how countries are right now competing for talents in today's economy. We know the economy right now is affected by the digital transformation. And so today we'll have 4 panelists that will discuss this matter. So first we have Christopher Yip, Dean of Applied Science and Engineering, University of Toronto. We have Magdalena Krol, Associate Professor, Associate Dean, Research, Innovation, Enterprise, and Partnerships at York University, Lassonde School of Engineering. Mary Wells, Dean of Faculty of Engineering, Professor, Mechanical and Mechatronics Engineering, University of Waterloo. And Stephen Waldman, Associate Dean, Research and External Partnerships, Faculty of Engineering and Architectural Sciences at Toronto Metropolitan University. So we'll start with you, Chris. So in today's world, what is the role of government and private sector can do to help academia to better prepare students to the current job market?
So thanks, Winston, for this opportunity. I think it's a challenging environment, and I think for our students, and when I talk about students, I mean the whole gamut of students, whether they're undergraduates, graduate students, postdocs, and as was just introduced, even lifelong learning. And so we're talking about universities educating the entire cohort of the workforce. And it's really about providing and giving our students the flexibility, the opportunities for experiential learning, the ability for the universities to adapt to the changing circumstances. And I think in a way that allows us to be a little bit less reactive to changes and be a little bit more strategic. We were having an interesting conversation earlier where one of the challenges universities have is that we have a long time constant. You know, undergraduate degrees are 4, 5, hopefully less than 5 for undergraduates. And then you've got, graduate students are 2 years for masters, 5 years for PhD, postdocs. So there's a long time constant. It's very difficult to quickly flip and bring out talent. And so as areas change, as industries shift focus. So I think a part of this has to be a big dialogue between the private sector and the government and the universities about, we feel that this is where the direction is, right? You look at the changes in AI, right? It's taken 20 years to where this massive growth has happened. Universities have helped seed that growth from the research side. They started to grow the programs, and now you're seeing the massive demand, and we're meeting that. But it's a long timeline, and I think this is part of the dialogue that we have to have with our partners in order for us to grow programs, provide the necessary resources for these programs, and as was mentioned earlier, open the universities to a broader community, whether it's international students, whether it's increasing accessibility to underrepresented groups. It's all about providing those sort of opportunities and working together.
Okay, and Magdalena, what's the role of the government and private sector to help your university to better prepare the workforce?
Yeah, similar to Chris, I think it's important to be able to access a diverse set of students and allow them to have that accessibility. So one way to do that is to offer co-op or internship programs. So I think every engineering university has co-op, which I think is a great way for private sectors to get involved in universities to make sure that our students are skilled, have the skills that they need. Another way to do that's great for learners, for example, that are already in the academic sphere, but those students that are not in the academic sphere yet, how do we allow them to access higher education? So there's other types of internships out there. At Lassonde, for example, we're doing the work integrated learning degree that we're starting to launch, and that allows students to come to university and work at the same time for 4 years. So after 4 years they graduate, they're working at the same time as well as getting an education. And so they can graduate almost debt-free, right? So that's a way to have education accessible to people that may not necessarily be able to. So it's a way of diversifying and also allowing education to be accessible.
Okay. Stephen, what's your take?
Well, thank you for the question. I think all of us are along the same lines here. I think the role of private sector and governments as a partner in this process. I think we've seen a shift over the past generation or so where industry was training people, taking that responsibility, but there's been so much mobility in the workforce and that it's fallen onto the universities. But the pendulum needs to swing back, and we need to have the private sector and government to be a partner between academia, the students, and government to work on a strategy. And just as Magdalena was mentioning, all of us have co-curricular type programs where we're trying to facilitate just that. So we have a series of programs designed to transition graduate students and directly into certain industries, because certain industries have different nuances than other ones. And we're seeing this flavor happening. And I think we need to have the private sector and policymakers more involved in this process and to reach out to the institutions to help us in that regard. Because what we want to do is we want our students to go out and to contribute, but we need that help to get it.
Got it. So we'll go down to University of Waterloo at the end of the corridor.
I'm the anchor person. Well, I agree with everything's being said. And in particular, I think we're partners. We're partners with the government. We're partners with private sectors and universities to generate and develop talent for the future for Canada. And I totally agree with what Chris said around we have to think very strategically about where we want this country to be in 5-10 years from now and position the talent that we need to be able to do that. We have a huge moment in time right now. The Waterloo-Toronto corridor. Chris likes to call it the Toronto-Waterloo corridor. But, we have one of the fastest growing tech sectors in the entire world right now. We're going to need to produce talent to fuel that. How can we work together to do that? We have a huge opportunity in Canada because by and large, the world trusts technology that's built in Canada. They don't trust as much technology coming from other parts of the world, but Canada has that brand around trust and technology. So we should be capitalizing on this, and we need to work in partnership with the government, with private sectors to do that. Why not? You've heard that all of our programs in engineering have cooperative education where we send our students out into industry to learn about those industries. When we think about the futures and what we need, whether it be health, economic, our society, send those students out to what I would call design in the wild. Look around, see what they see are the challenges, and let them be free to think about what are going to be the next evolutions and innovations in those sectors, and get them working on those things to create, to kind of continue the kind of flywheel around innovation in this country, so we can be true leaders in this.
So what would be your message to policymakers and provincial, federal governments to make that corridor? Waterloo, Toronto, Waterloo.
Absolutely, yeah.
Powerhouse.
Waterloo, Toronto, yes.
We want to make that corridor an innovation powerhouse.
Absolutely. So I think it's about investing in entrepreneurship. We all have students that have gone on to be, very successful entrepreneurs. The students really want to do that today. When I graduated, it wasn't as attractive and we didn't have the supports in place, but we do now. So investing in entrepreneurship, again, investing in the students having these experiential opportunities so they can go out into the wild, into these sectors and look around with fresh eyes and see where they think the next innovations are going to be. They can bring those ideas back into the university and start to realize them. And this can then fuel that kind of cycle of innovation, I would say.
Right. Because PhD students, for example, they have many options once they got their PhD after 4 years or 5 years or 6. So they can even stay in academia and doing research. Right. You can go to industry, or they can start their own business. So my question, so what role the government and the private sector can do to help academia to attract and retain PhD students and postdocs, researchers also.
And so this to me, so I think Toronto, Waterloo.
Waterloo, Toronto. That's why we're positioned.
I know, I was going to say.
Corridor is perfect.
Well, we kind of outnumbered already, Toronto.
So in the context of graduate students, I think it's This is an interesting question, right? Because we, all of us have programs where we are encouraging more students to go into the PhD route versus what has been classically the Canadian context of coming in at the master's level and then sort of exiting early. And so I think what we've started to see a lot more of, especially in engineering, is this entire continuum of research across the spectrum of fundamental science all the way to very applied science. And I think what's important to start to engage in, and this is being facilitated by the federal government, it's being facilitated by private sector partners as well, is increased engagement of academics with the private sector partners on collaborative research. And I'm going to kind of maybe stay away from some of the IP issues, but I think one of the things that we've seen and has been very powerful is corporate partners who have said, you know what, we love what you're doing in your labs. We love these research groups. We love these tech areas. We want to open it and give you the freedom to create, right? So kind of an open program. And if we see something that's interesting, then we'll actually set up a side partnership which has the IP and all those sorts of things behind it, but really helps support that continuum of research, right? The government supports through NSERC, very open research, but as my colleagues all know, that the amount of funding that comes from that is not really enough to really drive large programs. You really need private sector partners to come in and build consortia, collaborative programs where you're looking in, it's called the open science realm, where you're getting that information out so that the students can innovate out of it. I think the other part that we're all very engaged with is showing students that if you go through a PhD, the end game isn't being a faculty member. In fact, I think you've teed this sort of 10,000 PhD study. There's less than 20% that end up being faculty members. The majority actually go out into completely different sectors where they're leveraging that advanced skill set, that ability to project manage, drive independent projects into other areas like industry, starting their own companies, being entrepreneurs, moving into completely different sectors, and again, leveraging that talent base. But government needs to get behind supporting the growth of these graduate students because research is expensive and it needs resources. We need to build the capacity and the capability within the universities to accommodate programs in that space.
Okay. So Magdalena, at your university, so what would you say what will be your message to the private sector and governments to help you guys to attract and retain talents?
Give us money. No. I joke, but inflation is up, cost of living is up, job market is competitive, yet graduate salaries have remained the same. So if I was going to talk to the government, I'd say we need to make our scholarships more higher. Like they've basically stayed the same for as far as back as, way back when I was in grad school. So we need to make it more attractive for grad students to come and do grad studies because I like to think of graduate students as the pro athletes of education. They start as undergrad and then they come to grad school to really, get really good at things. And they don't graduate just with a niche skill set. It's not like my grad students come out saying, oh, I know how to run this one experiment. They learn how to critically think about problems. They learn how to think independently. They learn how to train others, especially at PhD level or postdoc. They're training masters and undergrad students. So they have a set of skills that are really attractive for industry and academia. So funding our grad students properly so that they can actually have a living wage is super important. So that's what I would say to our government partners.
Stephen, what's your take?
Well, money is obviously an issue, but on the other side, from what Chris and Mary were saying, is we need to understand better the direction. What sectors are facing bigger shortages than others in talent? Where is the future? What's going to happen 5 years from now, 10 years from now? The timelines are very long, and and we mobilize in unfortunately, tend to be a slow way to mobilize. So we need to be on top of this because the talent needs are dynamic, and so they should be. And so being able for us to react is difficult. So we need the constant engagement. So apart from, like I said, with money, but we need constant partners. We need to know what's happening in individual sectors. We've started to reach out to, rather than just individual companies, we're actually reaching out now to industry associations And rather than looking at single individual companies, we're looking at 30, 40, 50, 100 companies in a space. What do they need as a group, and how can we position our platforms that we're working on to help address their talent needs, and not just immediately, but also in the years to come.
Okay. So, but for example, in terms of besides government giving you money, what government can do in terms of policies or measures that can help you have a better partnership with industry, as you say?
So that's a very good question. I mean, so we need policymakers to help, facilitate that. There needs to be incentive for these companies to come to us, and to make things, like I said, to make things easier for us to facilitate these interactions. And I think that's the biggest role, because we do have a hard time establishing lasting connections with industry, because we do tend to be, in a lot of cases, I can't speak for everybody, but in a lot of cases they're transactional.
Yeah.
And then the relationship either goes stagnant, and we need a mechanism in order to see these through the long term.
Mary, so based on your experience at the University of Waterloo, so what government and what kind of role government and policymakers can do to help you guys at the university to attract and retain PhD students and postdoc students?
Yeah, I guess I'll make a comment that I don't think I've heard yet. I agree with what all my other colleagues have said, but when we look at the makeup of our graduate student population in Canada in engineering, it is predominantly international students. Part of that's driven by the fact, as you were saying, that it's not financially that attractive to stay on to do a graduate degree because of the lost opportunity cost of maybe going out and working. So it's a huge advantage to us that we have all these students from around the world, these very talented students that are choosing to come to Canada to learn in our labs and things like that. So I would urge the government to think about ways to honor that, recognize that, and celebrate that. Right now they do have incentives in place, at least our provincial government, around hiring what we call Canadian or permanent resident students over international. But we have all these other wonderfully talented students that are international. But then having said that, we have all these students coming from around the world. They don't have Canadian work experience. How can industry now help to welcome them? And how can government create incentives for industry to hire these new graduates that don't have Canadian work experience, to give them that experience, to help them to integrate into our economy and contribute. They really want to contribute to our economy and things. So I think that's one area where we can make a big difference in terms of our graduate students and the current makeup of our graduate students.
So well, at UFT, I guess you have a lot of international students. What can the policymakers at the immigration department, what they can do to help you guys to attract and retain those international talents, as Mary mentioned?
I think it's an interesting question. I was going to say one of the things they could help was actually process visas a lot faster. Yeah. That would be
that's true. Yes,
I'm just kidding. Everybody I think gets with that one. There was a major flaw in the system early this year in terms of getting our undergraduate students to campus, or even our graduate students to campus. In fact, I've got one student trapped in another country. I haven't been able to get her over here because they're waiting on a visa. So there's some operational things. Yeah. I think that, as Mary mentioned, one of the challenges we have is really that, we've got so many students that want to come. They either coming for a research degree, they're coming for a professional master's degree as well, which is another talent stream which is growing. I do think that valuing, and I think making it easier for transferring the skill sets. So you get students who are coming, especially for graduate students, they've got an undergraduate engineering degree from abroad. And when they come here, is how do we make sure that our regulators, in the context of engineering, recognize those degrees? That's in order for them to get a job and working for a private sector. But I think within the broader context, I think it's easing that opening. I think it's providing support for us to recruit these graduate students at the international scale. We definitely have a challenge in convincing domestic students to go to grad school for exactly that same reason around the cost. I think another part of this equation is also providing the resources to the university to continually renew our faculty and expand our faculty complement in strategic areas. This is an interesting problem because universities, do you just simply replace faculty as they retire? Or how do we grow our faculty complement? Because growing faculty complement means we can grow research programs, we can recruit more graduate students, we can train more undergraduates, and we can build capacity in the system. Right now, that's very constrained within the universities. We don't have that ability to sort of go out and build a whole new although we're talking about it, building a whole new campus together collectively, that could help fill the need for talent, right? And this is a bigger policy question actually for the provincial government, which controls kind of the education realm.
Okay. Magdalena, so can you give us a portrait of the international students at your university and what can we do to help them to?
I think it's very similar in every university. Same thing. We have a lot of international students. We can't take them all because of all the things mentioned. So, but one thing I did want to mention is a program like MyTax, which we haven't talked about, which is the internship program for graduate students. That's invaluable. It's great. I think those kind of programs, we should have more of them because it links academia to industry and it brings our cool research and applies it to industry problems and needs. And it sends out those graduate students that are highly trained into the workforce. They get to work for 4 months or whatever it is, and then they come back, finish their degree, and now they have an in. And it's also great for industry because on-job training is the best type of way to interview a person, right? So I think those type of programs, such as MyTax, I think that's something that government or policymakers, they can expand it. I think those are invaluable.
So to attract and retain international students at your university, what will be your message to people at the immigration department? Is there any message you would like to besides speeding up the visa?
Well, I mean,
and give us money.
Unfortunately, speeding up the visas and giving us money is two of the biggest issues. Nevertheless, as Chris and Magdalena were mentioning, it's about reducing these barriers to entry, and we need to look at all of the barriers that international students face, whether it's language, culture, recognizing their degree requirements, facilitating, extra, opportunities like co-ops and internships and things like this. It's about reducing all of these barriers, and we can sit and talk about all of these different ones, but holistically speaking, we need to look at the life cycle of an international student, where they start and how they proceed through the system, and to really strategically see where are the bottlenecks in this, and we have our own perspectives on that, but we also need to see on the other side when they get to industry, where are those barriers as well, and I think by working together we can decouple some of these things and really add value and to streamline this process better.
So what's happening with Waterloo? So what's your take on that?
Well, so maybe I'll shift it a little bit because I just think I want to talk a little bit about the power of collaboration and give an example on the graduate student side. And I think this idea of a bold collaboration, we can think about the universities working together, or again, this partnership between government, industry, and universities. But the example I want to give is something we're all involved in, which was an initiative we started 2 years ago around looking at concerns we had that the representation of Black engineering students and Indigenous engineering students is in our professoriate and in our graduate students just was very, very low. Very low compared to what it is in the country. And so together we have partnered, I think there's 20 universities across country now, to develop a program called the IBET PhD project, which is about educating Indigenous and Black students in engineering and technology. And the acronym IBET is really like, we're betting on you for the future. So now we have 30 students that have enrolled. We've all invested up to $1 million to do this. And it was really a collaborative effort amongst us. And it just really speaks to the power of collaboration in terms of what we can accomplish, because these students have formed a network amongst all of our universities with each other. And MyTax is involved. They're going to have wonderful experiences. And this is the kind of pathway and experience we need to give all of our PhD students. And at Waterloo, I'm using it as a way to reimagine our PhD program, because these students are being given a very healthy fellowship by the deans, and all these other experiential opportunities and this network of people to help them be successful and be positioned to be successful, either as professors or entrepreneurs or moving into industry in the future. So I just think it's a really great example of the power of working together in a collaboration with each other. So if we would have never been able to do this just on our own. So it's just a really great example of something like that. So let's think of other examples like that where we can work together as universities with government and industry to create those kinds of unique opportunities and things for our students.
So yes, and as you mentioned, accessibility for local talents to go to PhD programs, it's very important. Is there other initiatives that you do at University of Toronto that help that accessibility?
For the graduate students?
Yeah.
So I think an interesting dilemma, and we had maybe talked about this a little bit earlier, is that undergraduates, who obviously are your feeder stream into graduate programs, have a very, I think, narrow view of what research is. They think research is only done in the academic context. And so they think, well, why would I go to grad school? Because that means my only path is becoming a faculty member. And as we said before, we've all got co-op opportunities for our undergraduates. And so when I talk to undergraduates, I say, well, when you're doing your co-op, it's not a job. I mean, you are actually doing research for the company. You just have to frame it in that context. And so getting them to see that opportunity and realize, well, there was a really interesting project that I did during my co-op work term at Waterloo, or during their professional experience here with U of T, or during their work integrated learning at York. I would love to take that project and roll it up into a more fulsome graduate program. And you know what? Maybe I'll go back to my manager that I took this job with, and let's bring that, act as an ambassador to bring that industry partner to the university, to that faculty member who I now know was doing research in that space. They may have been teaching me calculus, but I asked them a question about their research, and I made the connection. So they end up being the ambassador, they end up developing that network, and they bring the partners in. That helps show the company, hey, the universities actually do something which could be useful for my company. They're not just a bunch of people wearing white lab coats and Bunsen burners with blue liquid boiling, right? There's a value there, and there's an opportunity. And I think this helps move it away from this transactional thing. It starts to move it into more of a holistic, it's more of a collaboration. You start to build the community with those companies, you build the consortia. We have some great examples at U of T of partnerships which have now lasted 20 years, and it's clearly not transactional. It's one which has grown into a massive a global co-creation center with Fujitsu, for instance. Started with an individual interaction 20 years ago and has expanded. And these are examples of how you show students what it means to go into graduate school, to take that opportunity, take that chance to explore. I do agree that it becomes a bit of it's a tough call if you've got this job in I won't say the Valley, I'm going to say within the Waterloo-Toronto corridor. That's where your job is going to be. That's the Silicon Valley North. And you're looking at that, and then you're looking at going to grad school. But I think you could look at those two and say, you know what, this company wants to hire me, this faculty member wants me as a grad student. I want to put you two together, and let's build a project that brings MyTax and a partnership together, and actually let's make a combined program and incent everybody that way. So I think there's some creative solutions that can help drive and change the classic model of what it means to go to grad school.
Okay. And Magdalena, so at York, how you can make it more attractive going to PhD?
So I think I'm going to go back and kind of take Chris's line, which is it doesn't start at grad school. It starts way back. It starts in elementary school. It starts in high school. And I'll tell you a story, because we're all storytellers as faculty, because you have to teach and engage the audience. When I was in high school, I didn't know what engineering was, and my dad told me what it was. So I thought, that's cool. Let's do engineering. I had a friend of mine who was in my science class or physics class, and I said, hey, I'm doing engineering at Western. Come along. She's like, oh, I went to my guidance counselor and she said it was going to be too hard. And so she told me to do math or I don't know, science or something. I'm like, what? Too hard? No way. Come with me. So she did. I mean, I'm simplifying, but she did an undergrad in engineering. She got a master's, and now she's a president or something high level at a company, right? A civil engineering company. So educating those that give advice is really important, because you're going to miss so many people out there that think engineering is not for them, where really it is, or science, or any STEM field, right? So getting at that level, I think, is super important. So back to your question, what is Lassonde doing? We have an academy called K2I, Kindergarten to Industry, and we're working with our school boards to do just that, to say, hey, STEM is for everyone, so that we can catch those learners early on, so that they can continue on to do their undergrad and then to do their graduate studies.
And how can we bring young girls to choose engineering?
Oh, well, there's so many there's so many ways. I mean, if you can't see it, you can't be it. I don't know if I'm getting that right. I always get the lingos wrong, but showing women that there are engineers out there that are female. I mean, that's kind of a no-brainer. But again, going back to the younger audience and say, this is what engineering is about. And engineering, is so much more than just working with robots or building bridges, right? It's so much more. There's biomedical, there's environment, there's just, engineering can teach you the skills to better humanity. And I think it's accessible to everybody.
All right. So, Stephen, what got you to be an engineer?
What got me to be an engineer? Well, I actually wanted to be an architect, and then my my parents steered me towards engineering. But nevertheless, what's great about engineering is it's very creative, but also very prescriptive. So it has both sort of elements to it, and I think that's why I've stayed in engineering, because of the creativity side, design, whatever you want to call it, and then being able to help others, whether it be industry or individuals, to move whatever it is they're driving forward, and that's what engineers do. I mean, we really make, for lack of a better expression, make things go, and we facilitate the process of making things happen. And I think, and that's what we tried to do at TMU. What we're looking at in this space is to step outside of ourselves a little bit and say, well, at the university we teach in disciplines, but when students go to the workforce, they work in industries or in sectors, and there is a bit of a disconnect. So what we're trying to do is transition the discipline-centered learner into a sector-type employee. And what are the things that student is missing in their education, their formal education and discipline, so that they can be a productive member in that industry sector. Okay. And that also requires bringing in students from other disciplines to help out and to work in this collaborative environment. In order so that we can transition them as a group to move, and that's our focus has been.
Anything to add, Mary?
Yeah, well, I mean, you just made me think a little bit about it. When you think about the way we're structured in terms of our domains, our disciplines in universities, it is really major driven. I'm in engineering or mechanical engineering or physics or whatever. Whereas today, a lot of young people really have a mission in life. Even though they're very young, they know a lot about climate change. They want to help with climate change. They want to help with food security. They want to help with health issues around the world. So how do we create opportunities to both be able to study a major, but also let the students realize their mission? And part of this goes to the sectors you're talking about in terms of what are those industrial sectors that are addressing those maybe more mission-oriented opportunities that students are interested in? How do we create those pathways along while they're studying their majors to also realize their mission and give them those pathways, whether it be through co-op, whether it be through some of the electives they take, whether it be through the student teams they get involved in their extracurriculars activities, but giving them those opportunities. And really, our students represent our embodied knowledge, that come from the university. They have a sense of what we're doing at the university, so they create those tangible connections into industry when they're there on a co-op, or into government when they're there on a co-op or internship or something. So how do we strengthen that connective tissue, our students? Because the students then come back and they have a sense of what's going on in that industry. They're bringing embodied knowledge back from the industry to us. So how do we take advantage of that in a more purposeful way. And that becomes the connective tissue between all of us. So I do think there's ways to strengthen that and to maybe incentivize industry to through government funding or something to you know, get that connective tissue going, because they can create those connections, as Chris was saying, between the research going on at the universities and the needs of the industry, and make those stronger connections with each other. So I think there's lots of ways we can take advantage if we think strategically about it. And again, thinking sector specific, what's going to go on in health, sustainability, the economic future, our society futures, things like that, or technology future too. If we think about it in that framework, I think there's a lot we could do.
So we have a lot of people from industry here, a lot of people from the business community. So my question to you, Chris, is what is the key ingredient to a successful collaboration between universities and industry? What be?
I think the key ingredient is making sure that it isn't transactional, right? It's not the first question out of the academics thing shouldn't be, well, what budget are you going to give me for the project? I mean, it really, I actually keep that completely separate. I think it really needs to be a conversation about what are your needs? What are your immediate needs? What is the time frame you're thinking about? And let's figure out how we can position your project or theme against the kind of talent we've got, right? You've got industry that approaches us and they say, well, we've got this project, so that may fit really nicely with a capstone fourth year project. We've got this, well, that may actually fit really nicely with a full PhD project, but let's bring you in and actually make it kind of an open discussion. We often have companies that say, well, we have data. We'd like to figure out how to analyze it. And I say, well, you know what? Open a hackathon, right? Come into our AI center, let's create a hackathon around your data. We'll anonymize it if it's financial data, but let the students play with it and see what they come up with, right? And we see that a lot of interest, and this actually starts to get the industry partners thinking about, wow, I wish we could train our employees in the same way. And we've actually started to see this become part of a virtuous circle, that the industry partners are in, they're mentoring the fourth year students who are working on a capstone project tied to their data, and they realize, boy, I wish I had more time to do this at work. And so they start to bring the company in, and you start to do kind of this lifelong learning, you start doing micro-credentials, you start doing workshops for the corporate partner. And that really builds this linkage a lot tighter with the universities and what they have to offer. So I think that's one thing. The other thing from the private sector, which kind of goes a little bit to what Mary's saying, is that we're seeing students who have these interests, and they're starting to chart paths within the university around their degree, which ones we had not thought about, right? It's the classic sort of build a field, let people walk all over it and figure out the route they took, and that's where you actually pave the sidewalk. So we see students do random things, and we sort of lurk, and we realize, hey, there's a bunch of students that are all taking these political science or public policy courses. We say, you know what, let's create a public policy certificate for engineering, which is what we're doing now. And we say, well, there's a whole bunch of students that seem interested, I don't know, because there's a pandemic, about public health. So let's create a certificate in public health for our engineering students, right? So industry sort of realized, hey, you're now getting a student who's trained in civil engineering, who's done a public health certificate, and they've also taken a course in public policy and governance. This seems like a really strategic type of partnership. How can we help and participate in that? And I think this is part of these conversations that you start to have with industry. You start with a very focused project, but you really have to let it grow, and you bring the people to the table. You realize companies, it's not an HR discussion. It's much broader than that.
I see. So what's happening at York? So what's with your partnerships with the private sector? So what makes it work?
Yeah, I mean, I think a good way, a slow way of industry to become involved in academia is you can participate in capstone projects. I think that's a great idea. I think every university has a capstone project. They're always looking for industry partners and problems that they need solving. Another way is joining advisory boards. Our curriculum committees they all have advisory boards, and we're always looking for industry people to come on board. That's a great way for industry to come and say, hey, we're looking for these type of attributes when your students graduate. And then faculty say, okay, how can we bring those into the curriculum, those type of attributes, that when they graduate, they have these skills, whether it's critical thinking, lifelong learning, whatever. We can hear the industry and what the kind of skills they require. And once they start collaborating on that scale with us, then that's the next step is bigger partnerships, whether it's through research or professional development or anything like that. So you can start small and just kind of dip your toe in and see if you like the environment, and then you can go from there. But I think having those kind of long partners is really important for academia and industry alike.
So Stephen, you work closely with industry in terms of partnerships. So what makes it a successful partnership with industry?
I think a successful partnership with industry is one that is going to truly address the needs of industry, to be honest with you. That's the first thing we ask a partner. Just as Chris was mentioning, what are your needs? What are your needs now? What are your needs in the future? And those needs may not just be technologically based. They might be talent. There could be other things. And in order to facilitate a good, and just don't keep it within my discipline, for instance, like a good partnership. For instance, we just did one recently where we brought in a handful of MBA students to do the business case for this particular thing that was going on, and we were working on the engineering side of it. These types of things, and just stepping outside of ourselves and really saying, what does our partner need? And we, in most cases, I think at the universities, we have somebody working in that space or some element in which we have to address those needs. And then if we can't find it within our own institution, we should go outside of our institutions and look between ourselves to service that need. And that's the only way we're going to see this forward. I mean, I think we're going to see it forward is just, and then industry needs to present themselves. They need to come to us. We do a lot of outreach. I'm sure all of us do a ton of outreach and have a dedicated staff that are doing this. But we need people and industry and policymakers to come back to help showcase what are these two. For instance, we're part of the AIM Day, and we think we all are part of AIM Day, which is like sector specific or really sort of very specific challenges within certain industries. It could be as matchmaking between industry and academia. And we need more of these types of programs. And again, inter-university programs where we're not competing with each other, essentially. We're the same partners. Yeah.
Thank you. Mary?
Waterloo's maybe a little bit of a different university because it was founded by people from industry and the community. So it started, one of the founding faculties was engineering because they saw the need for it. And that's why they really led the way in co-op, because the industry people saw the need for that grounded training and the practical side of things. But, one of the things we're thinking of now is, what about a reverse co-op where people from industry come into our research lab for a 4-month term or something like that? So again, creating those stronger connections and linkages so that they have a much better appreciation for what we're doing and they can see how we can help transform their industries, support and facilitate and transform their industries and things. So to me, it's all about creating stronger connections. And again, as Chris said, moving away from transactional things to transformative things where we do have long-term partnerships and we help each other. It's a very synergistic relationship in terms of the talent, in terms of the ideas, in terms of advancing those ideas, creating new products, helping those sectors advance for this country and for creating wealth for this country and things. So it's just creating those stronger connections, I think, in different ways we can do that. So.
Right. So before we end, Chris, do you have something to add as a final word?
As a final word, first off, this has been a terrific opportunity to discuss a really challenging topic, and the universities play such an important role in training that next generation of talent going forward. And I think it's important from the government's perspective and from the private sector's perspective to realize that the universities mission is one that extends over such a long time frame, right? It's classically it's the undergrad, but it's now progressing more. It's retraining. It's showcasing what's going on in the research environment and showing the evolution of the university as a talent pipeline for the private sector and for government. And I think this is an important message that the government needs to recognize and industry needs to recognize, is that when you left the university, come back and see what has changed, and get excited about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the universities have wonderful people there. We have students that are getting wonderful skills that are needed both in industry and in academia, and the partnerships that we can make with industry and with government to strengthen that would be invaluable. So anything that we can do to go that way would be great.
Great. Stephen, want to add?
Well, my colleagues have said it quite succinctly. We need to proceed together. Because we all add something different to it. And again, it's in the spirit of collaboration, and whether it's within your institution or outside or cross to industry, we need to work together. We need to collaborate. We need to have a constant dialogue. And it's only through this constant, and there'll be challenges, and there'll be, but we can work through these things to move forward. And I think collectively we need to do this, and that's been a little bit of the challenge, I think, is to get us collectively to work together.
Thank you. Mary?
Yeah, I guess my final word would be to not underestimate the importance of research. And we do all represent universities, and one of the distinctions between a university and a college is that we do research, and we are research intensive. And I know that colleges do some applied research, but not to underestimate the value of immersing a student, our talent, whether it be undergraduate or graduate students, in an environment where research is going on, because you are working and being educated by people that are advancing knowledge. They're at the latest frontier of knowledge. And so the ideas, the inspiration those students get from experiencing those things, it can't be replicated in just, kind of some form of an online training program or something. It's just so important. And again, the students then become that embodied knowledge, that embodied aspirations, energy and things that will go out into industry to help them move forward and things. So
Great. So that was Christopher Yip from University of Toronto, Magdalena Krol from University of York, Stephen
Waldman.
from Toronto Metropolitan University, and Mary Wells from University of Waterloo. Thank you for sharing your insights. That was a great brainstorming session, I guess. And thank you for sharing your message with the policymakers and to the industry. So that was the panel on Educating Tomorrow Human Capital. Thank you very much.
thank you very much.
Thank you.